Okay, we're live. This would be the first one. Right, so we're going to be looking at arrays. Have you all got your Lazarus open? If you are with us online, then what you'll need to do is you need to have a copy of Lazarus open. You'll need to have this open at a blank, simple application. What I'm going to do is I'm going to run through 3 different types of arrays that you would need for COMP1. And part of COMP1 is that you will need to understand the way in which these data structures work. So I'm going to go with the most simplistic version of an array, which is a what? A one-dimensional array. So what I thought I'd do is to give you some visual examples of what a 1D array looks like. And there it is. So I couldn't think of something any more one-dimensional than this. So all you are looking at is creating a list. It is a list and it is of a single data type. So if we were to put their names in, good luck remembering them. I had to go on Wikipedia and look them up. If you know their names, what we're going to do is we're going to create a program which is going to create a one-dimensional variable array, and we're going to enter their names and we're going to output them. We're going to need to use a loop. Now, if this is a static array, that means it's got a set number of items in the array. What type of loop would you use to iterate through? A for loop. Excellent, because a for loop has a set number of iterations. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the actual code. So there we go. That is an entire program. And I'd like you to make use of the code that you can see now and actually create that program. So remember, in Lazarus, you're using a simple program. Okay. And for those people who are online, if you want to ask any questions about what we're doing here, please type them into your screen. I'm going to give you a few minutes just to type that in, and then we'll run through what it should actually look like. So as you're going, what I will do is to just explain what we have created. So you can see up here, we've given our program a name. We've used our var. And what we've done is we've created a thing called 1D, which basically for us is one dimension. And it is array 0.4. That means 0 to 4. How many items would I have in that array?
5.
5. 5 items, because it goes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So remember, 0 is actually a number. And here we're going to have another integer, and that integer is called count. We're using that for a for loop. You can see that there. So our for loop uses that integer variable. Can anyone tell me what that integer variable is called in a for loop? Yes?
Stepper.
It is a stepper. It steps because what it does is it counts which iteration we're using. So it starts at 0, it loops through. It then goes to 1, it loops through. And eventually it will become 4. When count equals 4, we break out of that loop. Okay. Once you've got this one here, you've then got another for loop, which then not just takes the information in, but writes it back out. Now I'm going to have to consult my notes because I am reliably informed that the names that we are looking for are Niall, Zane, Liam, Harry, and is it Louis? Okay. You're nodding in embarrassment. I'm going to thank Wikipedia for that. We've got a couple of questions there and saying, well, why use a stepper? And I think we've already gone through that. The reason why we use a stepper is because we need to know which iteration we are on in order for that for loop to go for a set number of iterations. So why would we have 1D and then count? What are the square brackets for? Any ideas what the square brackets are actually there for? Okay, so the square brackets in here, anything that's in here tells us which item in that array to look at. Now count is going to go from 0. So initially, we're going to go 1D count. So go to item 0 of our array called 1D. Go to item 1 of our array called 1D. Go to item 2. But because it's a for loop, it becomes dynamic. Okay, so make sure you save those. People in here, make sure you save them in the B drive, otherwise it's not going to work. I'm going to just move on very, very quickly. That is what you should end up with. So it should ask you 5 times to enter in a value. And each time you enter in one of those values, it will save it at that step of the array. And then that for loop will then output each of those values to the screen with this little line between them. So just for the benefit of those people at home, I will just pop back to the code just to let you finish. Okay, does anyone have any questions about that code? Oh. Okay, someone's saying it's all backwards for you here. Thank you. Okay, so it looks like what I see is a mirror of what you see. So what I'm going to do is just rearrange this for you. Excellent. Could you let's have a look. Can you see that properly now? So it's looking backwards for me. That should be okay for you. Okay, so I spent hours putting that back through. Never mind. At least you can see it properly now. Okay, so that gives you a one-dimensional array. What it should look like is this here. So you're entering your value, and then they're outputting it to the screen. Okay, I can see that working on a few people's screens. Working for you? Yes, fabulous. Okay, so for you guys at home, I'm very sorry. We'll redo this one in another video. However, what we're going to do is we're going to look at something a bit more two-dimensional. I tried with one direction. I'm afraid I couldn't make them any more dimensional than they already were. So we need to give more values. A two-dimensional array is just basically a table. That's all it is. But we have a limitation to our table in that whilst it has 2 dimensions, it can only have a string, or it can only have an integer. So what we have to do is we can only put a table of data of the same type. So I've given you what these people do. You can make up names for them if you like. And to create a 2-dimensional array, we're going to need to have a nested for loop, because we're going to go along each of the rows and look at each of the columns. So we can say at row 1, or at row 0 in fact, we've got a person here, we're going to put his name in there, and then the second item of that row, we're then going to put more data in. So let's have a look. What I'd like you to do is to take the program that you've already done, go File, Save As. Put this into a different folder, calling it 2-dimensional array. Thank you, Harry. Okay, so this one is going to be called 2D array. And rather than just having 0 to 4, for this one we're going to have 0 to 3. How many data items does that give us?
4.
4. Excellent. 0, 1, 2, 3. But then after that we've got a comma and 0 to 1. So how many columns does that give us? 2. Yeah, 2. So what this is saying is this is setting up a table. In our brackets, in our square brackets, we're saying we have 4 rows and 2 columns. So we know these are rows, these columns. And in all of these data items, we are going to use a string. We can't use anything else. We are restricted to just one data item. And then, because we need to have 2 for loops, one nested inside the other, we've got count x and count y. You could call these count row, count column. I've used x and y because they make more sense to me with coordinates, but they need to be meaningful names. Now after that, we've then got our x stepper. This is the outermost for loop. And this will perform the whole task, and it will go through each of our rows. So count x is counting each row from 0 to 3. You can see that there. Again, why are we using a stepper? Because we have to iterate through a set number of those steps. And then we've got another for loop. So we have a for loop inside a for loop. We are creating inception. What we have is we then say for every row, we check the columns. Oh, and then we touch the screen, and we go too far. So for every row, we touch the columns. We go through and check each one. So for every, where are we? For this one, enter the value for the row. So here, we're entering the value for the row, and then column 1. So there, it would initially, it would be enter, why would I do +1 for this one, just by the way? Count x plus 1.
Increasing the count by 1 every time.
Why?
So it doesn't get, so people are not labeling 0 as a...
Absolutely. People don't really count from 0. They count from item 1. So we're making this more user-friendly. So actually, when it's item 0, we're telling the user item 1. If it's item 1, actually it's item 2. So what we're doing is we're understanding the way that humans think and the way that computers think. So what we're doing is we're then going along. That will loop twice because we have 2 columns. So this one, we'll read line. So enter the first one, now enter the second one, and then you'll write line. These ones are just for gaps. Put some right lines in there just to make it a little bit nicer for our users. Okay, so once you've got that, you then move on to the next bit of the program, which is the final piece, which is to then do another nested for loop, which outputs it all back to the page. So you're taking in all the data, you're saving it in your 2-dimensional array, and then you're using another nested for loop to write it all back out again. So you can see there, that's the rows, that's the columns. And then we're using this 2D, and then we're using our stepper variables to say what we want to write back out to the page. We've got this end right line here within our initial for loop so that each of our rows is split up. So this is just for visuals, this is for our humans. should nearly be there now. So what you should get from that, once you've plugged in some data, is something like this. So up here, you see those right lines give you that gap between each one. Asks you for row 1, column 1, then row 1, column 2. That is your inner for loop. That is your nested for loop there. This bit is your outer for loop. So another nested for loop for row 2, column 1, column 2. Another one, row 3, column 1, row 3, column 2. I'm not going to be able to say this next one. Enter value for row 4, column 1, and row 4, column 2. So these are your nested for loops within your outer for loop. And then again, you've got each nested for loop outputting them to the page. Remember that we use write rather than write line because we wanted to write two things going across the page. So write line will actually give you a new line, whereas write will allow you to just write across the page. Okay. I can see some data entry going on, so it's working. Working? Wow. Yeah? Excellent. Losing the will yet? Or just too warm in here? You're cold. Yes.
Another question.
Yes.
If the row is equal, if it's 0 to 3,
Mhm.
if you type in the in 1, 2, 3, 4 all the way to 16,
Yes.
it only shows 1 and 2. Why doesn't it show the third value?
So it shows 1, 2, 3.
It's not very close to the row. So 68, 1, 2.
Okay, so have a look. So we've got 1, 3 there.
You need to what to do to make it so
Yes. Thank you. Well done. Okay. So those are the types of arrays that we've covered in class before. We've used this type of array for noughts and crosses. This is an alternative way to do it. We've used the previous type of arrays where did we use arrays before? In fact, for your assignment games, we use those arrays just to record. We were recording all the scores that people had gone through. So if we have a standard list, this gives us a standard list, but we probably want to have data which is a little bit more complex. And this is where we get records. How many of you have downloaded the pre-release, 2014 pre-release, to have a look at? Looked at them?
yes.
Oh, yes, we hope you have. How many of you saw that pre-release and just kind of ran away? Yep, fair enough. And the reason why is probably because the first thing it sticks at the top is a record, which looks terrifying, but actually is quite simple. So imagine that you needed to save data which was both a string and an integer. We can't do that in a two-dimensional array. What we need is a different type of data structure, and that data structure is a record. Now, think of a database. Just try not to wince. Think of a database. In that database, you have records. What is a record? Anyone that's doing IT at the minute. Or it is a stored piece of information. It's like a row of data. If you think about Excel, each one of those rows, if that was taken into a database, it's called a record. It's a set of data, all the different fields about that one particular item. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at records. I know they're not, they're CDs, but work with me on this one. They have different data types. So what we are going to do is we are going to create a record which highlights all the different data types that we need. And then we're going to take our record, which describes them, and we're going to create an array of records, which is basically just a two-dimensional array with multiple data types in there. The way that we create a record is instead of a variable, it's a new one, we use a type. So if you use the keyword type above your variables, and now I've called this T album. If it is a type, we put a T in front of it. It's just a standard naming convention. So if you were looking at the 2014 pre-release, we would be looking at T cards and T decks because it's all about a playing card game. So here, our T album is describing our albums. So within that, how many columns for our essentially two-dimensional array have we got?
Yeah.
2. We've got 2. The reason we've got 2 is because we only have title and we have year. And then we've got, and then we've got these. So what we do is we create the type, we describe the columns, and then we get to create a one-dimensional array, which is much easier, by the way. We create a one-dimensional array of T albums. So create this in your new, do a new simple program. So program records, type is going to be T album. It's of type record. Now record is a keyword. This is the one time where you don't Okay, I think we're back in the room. So what I will do is I'll just rerun through that program. So we had our records, remembering that it is almost like a two-dimensional array, but we give each one of these a name. So instead of 0 and 1 up there, actually what we end up with is title and year. So we have a named column. We then create a T album. That is our record. We give the title and the year. Remember to do your type before you do your variables, because what you're doing is you're saying I'm creating a variable of type T album. Okay, after that we created a for loop which allows us to identify album 0 dot title, album 0 dot year, and then finally we wrote those back out. So how many of you have got that running? I can see a few orange lines, but not many. Okay, and then finally, you should have that. And then if you've got that, you've managed to go through a one-dimensional array, a two-dimensional array, and an array of records. And if you can do an array of records, then you can get yourself ready for the COMP1 exam. Do you have any questions? Other than why?
Is this everything that COMP1 covers?
In terms of arrays, these are the things that you need to know. So if you need to know the difference between a one-dimensional, two-dimensional, and an array of records, you also need to be able to explain why you would use a two-dimensional array and an array of records. So what's the difference between the two? So the fact that the array of records has got the ability to have different data types, whereas a two-dimensional array is just one data type. So you can have a two-dimensional array of string or a two-dimensional array of integer. But a record can have a string, a real, an integer. So it's more like real data.
Would we ever have to use a two-dimensional array in a record?
No. No, you would only ever have a one-dimensional array with records, because it's like having a two-dimensional array with actual names across the top. Okay, right. If we are happy, you have buttons to get to. I shall let everybody go. Thank you very much. Thank you for bearing with me with technical issues as well.